Today, since this is the quality of life strategic action team. We're only going to be discussing quality of life as defined by the community members. And so what I wanted to do first was jump back to the results of the community survey. As you'll recall, we surveyed the leadership group to look at their opinions of how we could prioritize outcome areas. And then we did a community survey where we asked just a single open-ended question, what things are most important to you living in the city of Pontiac? And they had 5 text boxes where they could fill in just anything. Rita and I then went through and coded all of their written responses into different categories. And so those categories are what you guys are seeing right here. And so once we had those individual categories like people in relationships, recreation and entertainment, government, restaurant options, etc., we grouped those into those outcome areas that had been discussed by the leadership group. And so by far the largest number of responses fell into the quality of life outcome area. And so I wanted to remind you guys just the things that we grouped under quality of life. They included people in relationships, recreation and entertainment, the built infrastructure, that's things like road conditions, sidewalks, anything that would take like major physical construction to change. Blight included things that were a little bit easier to change. So things like trash, overgrown vegetation, things that just make the neighborhood feel not very clean and not very pleasant to hang out in. A lot of people explicitly mentioned youth recreation, and so we ended up separating that out into its own category because that's kind of a unique focus. A lot of people had some general things to say about the government. I want to point out, I'm going to jump towards the bottom here, that we separated out taxes because a few people said explicitly that they were concerned about just the taxes, and we're assuming that means like how the tax funding is being spent within the community. We then had lots of people requesting community centers, especially for youth recreation. We have some things that just fell under general quality of life. Usually there weren't enough of them to include its own category, so we just kind of clumped those together. A lot of people talked about having an excellent religious community in the city of Pontiac as like a positive thing. That's one of the things that made it meaningful to stay here. We also separated out parks and outdoor spaces from the overall recreation and entertainment piece because people had some very specific things to say about that. People also talked about food. They want restaurants within the community that they can go to as an entertainment option. They wanted better public transportation systems and better grocery stores within the community as well. So those were all of the pieces that kind of fell together as quality of life. You'll notice on this slide as well that I've left safety in here. So originally the leadership group conceptualized safety as its own outcome area. But the more that we thought about it and continued to look at the data and reread the community's input around safety, we realized that it was the largest single item that people in the community mentioned. And so 66 people explicitly talked about not feeling safe within the community, which is higher than any of the individual quality of life topical areas. And so we wanted to suggest to this group that we bring safety under our umbrella definition of quality life as we are creating it. So that's the community data. As Samino mentioned, one of our goals in this meeting today is going to be to define quality of life, which I will admit you left 2 academic people in charge of coming up with a draft definition, so they're super wordy. So if you guys want to help us parse that down, that's great, but we can start bigger and then kind of shrink that down as we go. I'm going to actually skip to the next slide here. So this is where I wanted to try to simplify those conceptual frameworks. If you'll remember from the beginning, we've got very detailed versions of all of the factors that go into these. But this is a revised conceptual framework based on what people told us about quality of life. And so I've basically divided it into those 4 categories of recreational opportunities, the physical neighborhood or community environment, safety, and then government operations. And then all of those things kind of filter down into creating these enriching activities and relationships that create a sense of community in the city of Pontiac. So this is just kind of that visual representation that divides all of those responses into these 4 categories. And again, tucks safety into our quality of life definition. So from there, this is where we need to start talking about definitions. So we've got a couple of drafts here for you. So I will read them to you guys if you are on the phone and not able to look at the screen right now. Quality of life is what comprises the experience of living in the city of Pontiac. Quality of life is the ability to have a place to live, eat, and play that is safe, well-maintained, and supportive of its cultural diversity. Quality of life is achieved when residents do not have to go outside the city of Pontiac to enjoy quality experiences, and that they are able to find them in their own neighborhoods. So that's one option of it. And you'll see that Rita and I tried to also bring in as much of the language from the discussions that have been happening in the leadership group over the last year and a half. And so feel free to pick any of the wording that is meaningful to you. The second example definition is quality of life is defined as the features of the community that contribute to an enjoyable day-to-day experience outside of work and school that fosters recreation, entertainment, and relationships. This is cultivated through a safe and clean neighborhood environment, trustworthy governmental operations, and adequate recreation and socialization opportunities. Okay, so those were super wordy. I will open it up to Samino in the group for feedback. Comments.
Hi, this is Sarai. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, just a thought, just a question. Do we have at our fingertips the vision and mission? And I ask because I'm wondering if we're going to need to think about quality of life in relation to our vision and mission, so that when we formulate our actual work plan and figure out which of these items can really have systemic impact on achievement and in the community, we need to look to our vision and mission as well.
Great. I think I agree with you, Sarah, because I think that somehow there should be an overlay of the mission and vision, because it's almost like one ought to be driving the other. You know, these are our parameters. So I think if we could do that, that would be great. See how it overlaps.
Samino, do you have those?
Absolutely. I'm pulling that up right now.
Here, I'll stop sharing my screen so you can pull yours up.
Jennifer, I really like the chart of the activities. I do have some questions on a couple of those things: transportation, grocery, and law that fit so low. That 8.6. We spend a lot of time thinking that the biggest driver is transportation and grocery store. And I know that Minister Kathleen Lee thinks about them when people talk about we need a grocery store in the community, but the results of that survey doesn't seem to point all that out.
Yeah, the thing about transportation in particular is that it's a small fraction of the community that doesn't have access to transportation, but for those people that don't, it's a deal breaker for pretty much everything else.
Yeah, which probably impacts the grocery as well.
Yeah, something. And so when we're thinking too about like the actions that we want to partake, and I've got a separate slide on this, we want to think about things that are like short-term, medium, long-term, and then things that are like programming, policies, systems, and environment. So transportation really lends itself to advocacy work on getting a stronger regional transit system through Southeast Michigan that adequately services the Pontiac area. So that would probably be the ideal action. And we would want to look and see if there are groups that are doing that, because I know that there are some pretty strong regional transit advocacy groups. So we could either tap into those or say, other people are doing this work just fine. Let's focus on other things that we can have a bigger impact on.
So I put on the screen our vision and mission, and thank you, Sarai, for mentioning that. It is something that we should always refer back to, and I think it, as we think about our outcomes, it is important to factor that into the process. But I just wanted to put it on the screen so everyone had an opportunity to look at it and read it. And also, it probably makes sense now to go back to Jennifer, your two definitions of quality of life, if everyone has had a chance to look at this.
Hold on one second, Samino, because I'm going to copy that language into this slide so we have it all in one place.
Awesome.
Ah, maybe not. Okay.
Samina, as you go through this, this word jumps out at me, thrive. What is thrive to all of us? What is the definition of thrive?
That's a good question. And just my initial thought of thriving is someone or a family that is able to meet their daily needs in terms of food, in terms of just having a stable home environment. And I would probably add to that feeling, I would go back to our quality of life, right? And right, you feel you're thriving when you feel that you're in an environment where you have a good quality of life.
Yeah, I
That's
would
good.
say the striving would go beyond Pastor Jones. The opportunities to thrive would, in my mind, say that our residents not only have those basics of a place to live, you know, a roof over their head and food to eat, but that they perceive that there are opportunities and they are in the process of taking on those opportunities to be able to go beyond that state of mere existence. You know, I've got a roof over my head. So to thrive means that you see a path for yourself of moving forward, of moving your family forward. And that mindset is what thriving means to me.
So Sarah,
Yeah, I
again,
would
go ahead.
I would agree with that. This is Ellie. I think it's this concept of reaching potential. So do people have access to healthy relationships, healthy environments, healthy resources that really bring out whatever's inside of them to reach their
Yeah.
potential? And that would be for the whole family.
Mhm.
All this sounds really, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Sarai.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say this. I love this conversation because I feel like it's getting to, okay, then what is the actual outcome, right? Because even as we're talking about, as we looked at the list of what's bucketed under quality of life, all of those feel like things needed to get to something, right? Like maybe safety is the outcome, and within safety, to get to a safer community, you need improved parks, you need more youth recreation opportunities, you need more whatever else, right? Like blight removal, each of the other things. And so I wonder if we can get to like what that outcome is, whether it's safety. Safety seems like it might be a good one because of how much it was noted on the survey, but I wonder if there's like a key measure, whether it's safety, with which then the other things can be built in as strategies to get there. Because I think we need to have like a to what end, and maybe the safety is the end, understanding that there are other things, right? But and then the pieces, the different buckets within quality of life are how you get to that.
Would it be
Yeah.
advantageous for us, not so much at this meeting, but maybe to give the definition of thrive? Because it's sort of like, do you like oatmeal cookies or chocolate chip? Yeah, you gotta, what do you like? You know, and maybe we need to define what is thrive to us, you know, to the community. you know, Mike, I wish you would give us that educational definition from the students when they say, what does thrive mean? Uh, you know, it certainly ties into this quality of life and everything, but it may be a good thing for us to, in parentheses, put in thrive. We say it in our vision and our mission, but what is thrive to us, to individuals, to all of us? I think we all have a different definition.
Yeah, I think Pastor Jones, that's your instinct is right on. I think, and in addition to that, I guess I'm curious to know if we're going to be able to measure what we're doing, if we're
Right.
defining thrive and opportunities to thrive, as the minister said, as well, then where are we now? You know, what percentage, or, you know, to speak, you know, with, and that may not be the way we talk, but what percentage are thriving or have the opportunities to thrive now? And what is our goal? And then for over some period of time, and then how is it that these quality of life, safety, youth education or informal education things, how do those feed into that? And then we'll have a basis, I think, on which to measure whether or not we're getting somewhere.
I agree. And I feel like the measure needs to be something that can be, that's already measured, right? Like not that you would have to fully rely on survey data for, because that I think is just going to make it difficult to track as easily over time. Like surveys, I think should definitely be supplemental, but but have some type of publicly available data, whichever it is that we would want to land on, that can be tracked, that already exists, and the partnership doesn't necessarily need to do that on top, so that anything else can be additive. Any other data can be additive.
Excellent point.
Lisa Katz did a survey, which I spoke to her some months ago, and because we're looking at the committee of 50 on, you know, the brain drain, or how do you bring people back in? And I think it was a 10 or 12-year study that they had done. And maybe, Dr. Scott, you can get back with Lisa Katz and she can send you a copy. She sent me a copy of it. And that may give us some preliminary information that we could tie in.
And this was information about Pontiac specifically?
No, it was another, it covered several areas, several other cities or whatever that her foundation had done. It was just very interesting, you know, why people leave, why did they leave the state of Michigan, you know, leave other places, what cities did the young people go to, what was the key element that drew them and what have you. But there's probably some other, I was only interested in that segment of how do we create Pontiac as a city of destination.
Well, going back to the theme of quality life, Jennifer, could you show the definitions again? The two definitions that you talked about?
Yep, I just pulled them up. So I just copied the vision and the mission above them.
Okay, because quality of life, when I think about it in terms of a perception. When I think of Pontiac and I look at people and I hear people talk about Pontiac, generally they are speaking in terms of experiences that they have had in Pontiac that were very positive for them. And generally those experiences are very specific in terms of the places that they went to, the things they did as kids in the city of Pontiac. So there are very specific, you know, there are very specific remembrances of things that used to take place in Pontiac. So, you know, the question is, I hear people saying that quality of life is really some kind of a quantitative ranking that we're going to get. We're going to make some moves and we're going to look at data, and that data is going to tell us, but I'm not sure that that's really what we should be going after, because if quality of life is really a perception, on the part of Pontiac residents. And right now, the perception on the part of so many residents is not a strongly positive opinion of the city in which they live. And if so, I like the second one. The quality of life is defined as the features of the community that contribute to an enjoyable day-to-day experience outside of the work, because I do think much of what we're dealing with are features and aspects of Pontiac that either please people or displease people. And I think we have to kind of get our hands around, how do we really perceive quality of life? Are we really looking at it as this perceived perception? Or are we looking at it as data points that if we are able to move those data points, we're going to get quality of life? Because I don't know that the data points are going to give us what we really want.
I don't think we have to choose.
A turnaround in this community.
I don't think we have to choose one or the other. I think it's both. Because if we only do things that make people feel better about the community, and that's an important thing, not downplaying it, then it's first of all very hard to measure whether or not we're achieving what we want to achieve. But it's important. So if we, but if we only do that and not also undertake things that past research and data have shown to elevate a community, then we're not doing what we're set out to do. So we have to do both what the community has mandated, has told us, and what we know the research reflects. And I think that you're right. I think that second definition could work. I mean, because that last sentence talks about safe and clean neighborhood, government working well, and adequate recreation and socialization opportunities. The first two more about perception, although the second one, I guess, doesn't necessarily have to be perception. But the last one is something where you could actually employ information that we already know about what's important to do for youth. What are the important benchmarks for youth in terms of recreation and informal education and socialization, so that they can achieve the benchmarks later on in life that will make a thriving community? So I'm saying I don't think you need to choose one or the other.
Okay, I think that's the point I'm trying to make, is that I want we're talking about this, and I just want to make sure that perception is going to be a part of this, whatever we put together, that we understand that it's not just going to be data points and moving data points, that we're also going to have to move perception. That's good. It sounds like most people agree that we are going to need both.
Yeah, I think we do need both. And even, the first one is quality of life is what comprises, and then the next one is quality of life is defined. So one is what do you think comprises? One is defining. And as I look at the second level, quality of life is defined, that sentence, what that brings in is business, because the business community is shaping things with the activities and different things. Why have they chosen Pontiac for Motabella, for the M1 concourse to be successful, the Woodward Dream, because the activities that we give, that outside look said, this is a great community. When we did the Woodward Dream Cruise, people felt, boy, Pontiac, the place to go because of. So I think that both of them do fit in. One is perception and one is how it's really defined. I think both of them work.
Yeah, I agree. Both work and both are needed. We need to have those data points, but to Minister James's point, we definitely need to utilize some surveys, and that's one of the good things about having a researcher on board, in that we can do perception surveys with community members to gauge how they perceive the impact of our work. So I think it sounds like we're all aligned that we have to do both. And I just want to ask, are we leaning toward that second definition or way of describing quality of life? What are your thoughts, Pastor Jones? Which one do you like more?
I'm leaning toward the second. I think there's some words out of the other because it is perception of things that maybe Jennifer with her magic pen can extrapolate some of those words and combine them and lesson two. And I think that'd be great.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what I'm thinking. Cause like, oh, I'm highlighting the entire thing. Like there's some pieces of the first definition that I really like that I want to grab.
Yeah, that last statement, quality of life is achieved. I think that was one of the key things that we talked about early on, that people should not have to leave the city of Pontiac to do fun things, to be able to enjoy with their families.
And I think to that end too, when you use that sentence, it really gives us a measurable, because then we can measure the data of how many people are coming in and how many people are going out.
And a case in point, I was just invited to a birthday party for a kid, and they are actually having that birthday party in a park or at a park in Auburn Hills, because the park has the splash pad for kids to participate in, and everyone associated actually lives in Pontiac.
Auburn Hills, is that some city around here? I don't know where that is.
Yeah, it's very close.
Mhm.
It's very close.
And Minister James, in our previous conversation, you shared something that really it struck a chord with me, in that we were talking about the rec centers, and you mentioned that we don't just want to have quality rec centers for kids, we want places for families to go and to be able to go and participate in, our senior citizens as well. And so I think we should also keep that at the top of mind as we think about quality of life.
Yeah, we need a good community center in Pontiac. There are so many communities that are half as small as Pontiac that have lovely little buildings that are community centers, rooms that residents can rent and use. There's no excuse why we don't have a real well-equipped community center that whole families can go, and find something to do, and people are able to recreate and do things as families. So we need to build that, not having that, I think, is impacting the fact that our families are very fragile in this city. And we have a lot of broken families. We have a lot of children in foster care and those kinds of situations. So we need to be able to give our young families opportunities to be able to strengthen themselves. And a community center is a great way to do that.
Well, as another example of what I mentioned earlier, is the YMCA, which is closed now in Auburn Hills across from Oakland. But we had so many Pontiac residents that went there regularly because they didn't have an option in Pontiac.
No.
Absolutely. We definitely need to look at that. And if I go back to Jennifer's slide where it gave the number, when you looked at family and friends or something, Jennifer, I think, what was that, like 55? Yeah. People in relationships.
People in relationships. Yeah.
55. What a number that really says that people want to be able, and I've used this word because I get to do it every Sunday, congregate. People want to come together.
Yes.
Family and friends. So We do need the center. That's very, very important. And these numbers bear that out. And I think that one of the things that this epidemic has done is it showed us the value of family, friends, and relationships.
Yeah. You know, when we did our annual meeting with the Friends of Pontiac Parks, we had a gentleman who is the with the Minneapolis Foundation, and Minneapolis has one of the best park systems. They are rated as, you know, one of the top 3 in the country. And one of the things they did that really struck me is that when they went through that pandemic and they recognized the role that parks were playing, you know, as essential infrastructure, that basically the only safe place you could do was to go outside, maybe ride your bike, walk. And they had so much usage and so many people, homeless issues, you know, people setting up tents in parks, that what they did was, because so much of the city was shut down, they actually utilized city employees and deputized them in non-police roles, but just gave them like uniforms to be in the parks, to tell people, you know, encourage people, to talk to people, not to try to penalize them, but just really to work with people. And it was amazing what they were able to do, because the problems in their parks were extremely, you know, were really severe. But just the idea that they thought through to utilize people who would ordinarily be laid off and deputize them to work in parks and to be in parks, to be like a comforting resource to people, you know, who were, you know, just going through a state of trauma. I thought that was just a tremendous idea. And that's a value. When you start talking about problems, you can come up with solutions that you would never, ever think of. And Minneapolis did that. And because of that, they, you know, they really made some great gains there during the 2020 pandemic, during 2020. So there are lots of things that we can do, but we've just got to you know, come together and figure out what is it going to take to really bring our city out.
We now have some money to build that center.
Yeah, absolutely.
Minister James, I love that story too, because I think it does illustrate, like, there was a problem, even, I mean, there were a lot of problems, right, that caused that need because of the pandemic, even if it's specifically like mental health, right? And
yes,
and parks were able to be a solution for people. And so I feel like that's a perfect illustration of like, what is maybe the end goal there, and there could have been others, but was like improved mental health. Like, what's the end goal we want to see here? Is it increased Pontiac population? Is it because of people moving in, not moving out? Is it like, what is the like final thing we want to see? And then what are the things that can get us there? And it's probably all of these things that Pontiac residents have already shared, but it's but like, what are they going to add up to? What are they going to get to for Pontiac?
Yeah. Well, it's going to get to a better perception, you know, that data from a day-to-day basis. As you go out into the city and you talk to people, you're going to hear people changing their perception of where they live. Because right now you meet a person in a grocery store, you stop into a Walgreens, a CVS, and just talk to anybody. And generally you're going to hear the same things as Jennifer's laid out in this survey. They're just going to be repeated over and over and over again by different people. So we want to begin moving that needle on the perception of Pontiac residents about Pontiac. Because, you know, it's wonderful to be able to bring other people to our city and they see something, but what's really hurting us is that we don't see enough of positive things happening in the city and with Pontiac residents. You know, we need to be able to perceive our own city as a place that is comfortable and for us to live. You know,
How do you feel about your city?
and that we want to live here. You know.
And
What
to
do you think
Jennifer's
about your
point,
own city?
to
Great.
Jennifer's point earlier, one of the ways in which we change the perception is in many ways by changing the reality. And
Yeah.
some of you may know that over this past weekend in the area of Valencia, right off Martin Luther King, there were 3 murders. And someone I happen to know or be Facebook friends with was live on Facebook, basically showing 2 dead bodies in the street, and there was another dead body in the house. And this was, I think this was on the 4th of July. So
Yeah.
the point I'm trying to make is that safety is definitely something that I think aligns perfectly with quality of life in an area that I think is worth considering. And so Jennifer, I know we've done a lot of talking, and you had a lot of slides, and I hope we didn't throw you off task at all. But I thought that we really did have a good discussion regarding defining quality of life.
Yeah, no, you know, I always have backup slides for my backup slides. So I always put the clean versions of things up front. But yeah, I think one of the things that Kayla said was really important about like, what's that end metric, that end marker. And this goes back to some discussions that Rita and I have had with Samino, is that these quality of life things kind of come together and make it a community that you want to live in, so that you don't, as soon as you have the economic means, move out of the city of Pontiac. It becomes a place that you choose to live in instead of you're stuck here. So part of it is like, that could be a marker, you know, growing the population or at least decreasing the people that are leaving, especially the younger generation after they graduate high school, trying to get them to stay in the community. But that I also think what Minister James has said is really profound too, is that those perceptions of what people think on a day-to-day basis are so critically important. And so that's the data that tends to resonate with me a little bit more closely, because I think it's just a much better marker of where the community is at, and you can really ask the things that are important to the community. But there's some interim things that we could do as well. So like, and again, the original conceptual frameworks were very complicated, included just a ton of nuanced information about all of the things that go into these different concepts or strategies. But we can think of it as a little bit more nuanced of a conceptual framework, where that population level marker of the number of people that stay in the community is the end game. And so we might be able to see change in that in 5 to 10 years, but we want a more intermediate marker. So if it's things like safety, we've got existing safety data. We've got, you know, Oakland County Sheriff's Office has all sorts of information on the number of violent crimes, the number of property crimes, things like that in the city. But we then also want to consider community perceptions, because even though we might see the crime rates drop, if people don't perceive that, then it doesn't matter. You know, we might cut the number of murders in half, or, you know, by 75%, but people still might not feel safe, because their perception of safety might not necessarily be tied to that actual marker. It might be things like, there's so much blight in the community, there's burnt out buildings down the street, there's trash everywhere, there's overgrown yards, you know, like those are the things that might be more important to their perception of safety. And so I think that it's good for us to come back to this diagram where we like have these very discrete areas, because when we pick an action as a team, like we're not going to tackle all of this. Okay, we're probably going to pick like 1 or 2 bullet points here, and then pick that as the thing that we are going to start making action on, or maybe pick some things that are like short-term, medium-term, and long-term. I've kind of described this to you guys verbally as I talk about picking actions. So if you could think for like each of the bullet points, let me go back here. So like, let's say for recreational opportunities, we want to talk about the safe indoor and outdoor recreation spaces, parks, and community centers. For that bullet point, we could have an entire grid of short-term, medium-term, long-term strategies, things that are programming, things that are policies, things that are systems, and things that are environments. So like a long-term environmental one would be, or maybe a medium-term environmental one would be getting a youth recreation center in the community. A short-term programming one would be increasing the amount of community programs available for all ages. A medium-term policy might be increasing funding for recreations within the city of Pontiac. So we would want to think about each of these chunks as potential things that the action team wants to tackle. So it might help us kind of in shaping this conversation, thinking about like which one of these is most important for us to start working on, which one has the greatest potential for changing that quality of life perception. Is it recreation? Is it safety? Or something
Well,
else?
I would say recreation and safety would certainly be our top. The perception of safety is a little different depending upon where you are in Pontiac. The lifestyle that you're living, that perception is markedly different. But overall, the perception of safety and the concern about Pontiac being a violent, people hear about 2-3 people. The last I heard, it was 2 fatalities, not 3, but I'm not sure. Maybe there was 3. But when people hear things like that, regardless of where you are, whether you're experiencing that kind of violence, your perception of the city is that this is a violent place. I don't feel safe here. So when those kinds of things happen, it affects all of us as residents of this city. So I think safety is something, when you look at the Pontiac Universal Crime website, I think they have, 20,000-30,000 people who are logged into that site, because everyone wants to know what's going down in Pontiac. And it's good, but it's also very sad. So obviously Pontiac is concerned about safety. So I think that would be certainly one of the things that we want to start moving the needle on. How do we affect a change in the perception that Pontiac people have about crime? Basically, what we do with crime is, we call police, and we say, "Oh, rest in peace," prayers to the family. But those are not action items. Those are not. There needs to be more non-police activities going on a weekly basis to address the crime in this city, and that is not happening. How we address crime is we call the police, and some of these issues could be addressed in other ways, and we're going to have to find other ways to address them. So I think crime and the recreational are our best 2 opportunities to affect change. And I would put the youth center as well as the community center under the recreational opportunities.
So one of the other things I want to mention too is that on some of these, we might say that we need more information or more data, a better conceptual understanding of it, because I don't think, like with regards to safety, that we have a really good framework or an understanding of like what are the underlying causes that are contributing to this culture.
Absolutely.
Within the Pontiac community.
Yeah.
And so
Very
that
good.
might be one of the things that this group prioritizes to work on immediately, is just further understanding that issue.
No,
Yeah,
we
I
have,
agree. If we don't
I-
understand the root problem, we're not going to have the right diagnosis.
and we have Gil Garrett on our committee. It would be interesting. What is the sheriff's definition of safety?
Yeah,
yeah.
I was just going to say, Pastor Jones, excellent point, and I will reach out to Gil and make sure that he's on our next discussion, because I think he is the ideal person to talk about safety and crime in the city of Pontiac. And so I just wanted to echo your thoughts.
Yeah, because, I'm listing, there are people in Pontiac who say, boy, I wouldn't go down to Detroit because I don't think it's safe. But there are people in Farmington Hills love to go down to Detroit. Okay. So I think we need to really, maybe like Minister Kathleen is saying, we need a definition of it. And I think that it would be good to know, is safety calling the police, or is safety something else? So I think we need to get that defined.
And so Jennifer, am I correct in, I thought you were asking us under each of those 4 umbrellas to identify 1 or 2 of the bullet points that we may want to include in our definition of safety or quality of life?
No, because I feel like we have integrated all 4 of these primary areas in the definition. So this is cultivated through a safe and clean neighborhood environment, trustworthy governmental operations, and adequate recreation and socialization opportunities. So I was taking advantage of the fact that we came up with our quality of life definition much quicker than you anticipated, and was pushing the agenda of the meeting to start thinking about picking actions or identifying missing data. Or we could end the meeting early, up to you.
Hey, Jennifer, I think we had the effective group on with us today.
Right? Like, this is the dream team. So instead of spreading the work out into like another monthly meeting, starting to think about like what the action teams want to do is important. And then also giving the data team homework to do. So it sounds like we definitely need to dive a little bit more into those safety issues in the data. Samina will need to connect with Gil in the sheriff's office to really help understand their piece of it. So I think that those are things that we can do in the interim. And I will pull up one of my other slides, Samina, and because I wanted the group to understand, like, we've got this existing data. And again, some of it is like, some of it's great, some of it is not great, a lot of it's not great. And it doesn't really directly correspond to the issues that are important. And so for each of those 4 categories and bullet points underneath it, we can think about the data that we have and the data that we need. So again, I like using parks as an example. So data that we have is, we know that we have an adequate amount of park space. Okay, so according to all of like those markers based on population size, like we've got many more acres of park space that we need. We know we've got lots of community groups that do park cleanups. The Friends of the Pontiac Parks, led by Minister James, is doing a great job. But what we don't know is, what does the ongoing park cleanliness look like? So if a group goes in there and cleans it up, how does the park look 2 weeks later? So do we need more of those types of events happening? Are all of the parks covered by those types of events? How is the city doing at current park maintenance and equipment? Are there broken swings and slides in the park? We don't know if people are using the parks. And so there's like systematic observation protocols that the data team can do, where we go out and just literally count the number of people that are using parks on different days of the week, different times of the day. And we could look into like the adequacy of park funding. Like, is the city actually putting adequate funding towards things like mowing the grass? And if not, what are alternative sources of funding? So for each of those categories and bullet points, you guys might say, hey, we don't have enough data on perceptions of safety within the committee, or we don't know what blight looks like. I know that the city used a lot of their CDGB block grant funding over the last couple of years to address blight. And so theoretically, they have taken down all of the structures that were identified as blighted. But their definition of blight might not meet our definition of blight. There still might be boarded up houses that look like they need to be taken down. So we might want to focus on that, or looking at neighborhood cleanliness. We might want to just do some drive-by assessments of what those things look like. So for every piece of this, there's data that we have and data that we might want or need in order to address it. Keeping in mind the limitations of your 2-person data team, And also, we just don't want to like spend more time collecting data than we do being action oriented on these types of things. So again, like I think diving more into conceptualizing safety over the next few months is going to be really important, but we might be able to also be working in another area as well, if that makes sense. So that in a very large nutshell is where I was going with it, Samino.
Okay. So do we, I guess what I'm trying to wrap my mind around is what are the key attributes under quality of life that we intend to measure? Is it those 4 areas at the top? What's our outcomes?
It's going to depend on the actions that we want to take. So like, let's say that we don't want to do anything around physical environment, then we wouldn't need to measure anything around blight. If we only wanted to do safety, then that's where we would focus our outcome measurements.
And so should we think about or delineate either one of these now? Is it worth having that discussion, or are you suggesting that we need more data in order to make that decision?
Well, I think we can look at each of these and say whether or not they're high priority, low priority, or whether we need more information and data. So safety, I think we need more information and data to come back to the group. My personal opinion, if I were to take off my data hub hat, would be governmental operations is not something that we should address right now because it's difficult to change, difficult to measure, and just we're going into an election year. And so I think that that's just not our biggest priority. I think any of the other 3 could be a priority, but that's the decision of the group and not the data hub. We're just here to give you all the data you want and need.
Well,
I know I've been quiet this meeting, but I just had a thought when you were like thinking through what is like of importance level. The things that we maybe feel are a lower importance or things that we can't really affect, is that an opportunity where we could just like pass information to the people who are already involved in that? So you used governmental operations as an example. Can we just like literally take the statements out of the survey that were in regards to governmental operations and make sure that they have that information so they know how people are feeling? Or if we're not going to be able to do anything about safety, say, hey, this is the information that we have in regards to safety. If this can help lead anything that you are already working on in that capacity, I feel like we could even still count that as an action item just because we have information that we've collected and we've provided it to people who are able to, you know, make some changes. What they do with it is up to them.
That's a really good point. Okay, I'm adding something into our actions of advocacy and information sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask a favor? You know, we're working on a leadership symposium with the OU partnership and several others. And one of the areas that we're looking at in that discussion, it's a 2-day, it'll be a continuum workshop, but can I shamelessly lend your governmental piece and send it over to Dave Dublio and them, because it sort of fits right in with some of what we're talking about, Jennifer?
Yes. What
Thank
piece
you.
specifically do you
Well,
want?
I've just thought
the...
what you had on there for the governmental piece, because
Okay.
I'm sure that there are things that we're looking at and we'll have discussion. You know, we're going to have the governor and senators and everybody there, but it'd be great for them to look at that, the transparencies, the well-functioning government decision-making. How do you make that? How do you come to, consensus of opinion, all of those types of things. And so it'd be great for us, whoever's going to be leading those discussions, to be able to look at some of that. So if I could borrow that from you, shamelessly steal, sneak it into our discussion, I would really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I can provide you with some more information about like the specific things that people said. I do want to caution you though in how it's presented, because a lot of people had some fairly unsavory things to say about the elected officials within the city of Pontiac not being able to work together. But I think it was really eye-opening that this was something that people said was important to them. So people
Yeah,
are
'cause what
watching,
we-
people are caring and wanting a better government that represents them.
That's what we're talking about, respect. And I think there's the session on respect of each other, respect of position. How do you come
Yeah.
to consensus of opinion? You know, how do you really plan and get your vision out? And so if there is something you could send, I would
Yeah.
really appreciate that. If you could send me a copy of that. And we'll keep it going. I don't know if they've included you in those discussions, but I'll get with Dave Dublio on that as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
I wanted to comment that I like all 4 categories. I think they are all crucial for Pontiac. Just your comments, Jennifer, about the perception of government. But let's keep in mind that not just when I see that category, I am not just looking at the city or the government. I am also looking at organizations that are working within the city to affect change in that. I'm looking at groups like Pontiac United and all kinds of groups that are coming up now and coming in wanting to have an impact on city government. So I think some of those groups are part of our collaborative. And so we need to do an assessment of all 4 of these areas, looking at what is currently available and being done. Because there are a lot of young groups coming in now that are wanting to have impact on government and that are working to educate residents. They're working to get people registered. All of this work is important. I think for parks, we know that there's already a grant that's a $600,000 grant that's been approved to redo the Clinton River trails in Pontiac. So we need to do an assessment so that, as we go forward on all 4 of those categories of what has been done, what's being done, who's doing it. And that would give us a better feel for where we can maybe concentrate on. But I do think assessment of those 4 areas needs to be done.
Love that idea. I'm putting that on some, task list.
And I like that as well. And I want to push us a bit because as I talk to folks about quality of life, one of the first things they say to me, and this is from, folks who have done the work in other communities as well as some funders, is quality of life is not an outcome that we can measure, right? So we have to identify some specific things from that list that we can establish as our outcomes to address. And I'm not sure if we are there or if we need to revisit that. Jennifer, can you go back to slide 4? So as an example, I love the idea of what you said, Minister James, about keeping all 4, but how would we measure, as an example, excellent city services or transparency around taxes and funding? And I'm thinking, I want you to look at it through the lens of a funder. If someone is saying, okay, I'm going to support this effort, but I need to see specific outcomes, we have to be clear on what our outcomes are and how we're going to measure those outcomes. And so I just want us to really make sure that we give some thought around that before we leave in the last 20 minutes as well. I love the idea.
Does anybody know if the city has any measures of any of those things? Is there data and information at the city level that we can draw from? I mean, are we measuring any of those things currently at the city? should we be measuring those things? And if so, how should we go about doing it? See, those are the kind of little, how you build how you build the resolution around things, is to start asking those questions and figuring out, what we do need to measure in the city. Because even, for government, maybe the best we can do is to decide or put in some kind of way to measure. That in itself is an action item, to implement some kind of way to measure something, because you have to have data in order to really go forward with things. We know the perception is bad, but we don't really have really good data as to what's driving that perception. So that could be an action item in itself of working with the city or even an independent group to come up with that data.
I agree with that. I think also it would be helpful, like you had suggested earlier, is an assessment. So for example, if I just take the blight, what's the current number of vacated buildings, and start from there, because then we get our measurables. Let's say we choose that category. Where are we at today? And then how do we want, what percentage do we want to reduce that by becomes our goal. And then we get our measurement, and we could do that in each of our categories. So for example, how many people are participating in recreational activities in Pontiac today? How many facilities do we have? And then if we choose that category, we decide how many facilities do we need to service our community. Does that make sense? You kind of take it category by category, starting with your assessment. And then I think you can get your measurements, Amino.
And I think that we had, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Pastor Jones.
We've had a couple of groups, like OSHA did a survey. I think I mentioned to you all the package that they sent out, which covers a lot of the information. You've got that early start program with, Dr. Shannon out there at Oakland University that's working with families and young people and what have you. I think Coco is doing some things on the recreation piece. I'm wondering, rather than reinventing the wheel, if we could gather information from what they pulled together that may help us. I think on the blight piece, you're absolutely right, Ellie. The city would have a list of houses that have been blighted, that they've gotten rid of, or what the balance of them, is. And that's one way we could look at that to see, okay, what progress are we making, or what percentage do we want to be at? But there's so much other information, either from OSHA, and I even think Jennifer Llewellyn's group on that workforce development's done a survey as well. So some of that information is out there. We just need to say, hey, can you share it with us?
Yeah, that would be expedient for us. And I even think, when I think about the 4 categories, all important, I wonder if we should phase them in as suggested, short, mid, long term, or just take a couple of them. It sounds like from a resident perspective, safety and relationship, which would probably be that recreation quadrant, are most important. And I just would pose the question, do we focus on 2?
Yeah, so it looks like we lost Jennifer. Rita, anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'm thinking that what Minister James suggested would probably be a really good starting place, and maybe sending out to the leadership a Qualtrics survey, which I am kind of already formulating a draft in my head, Sabina, so I can certainly help with that if you'd like me to. Just showing them how we've laid these 4 categories out, and just asking an open-ended, are you already working on anything or aware of anything that's already in the works that addresses any of these categories, and just give people opportunity to respond. That gives us the opportunity to say, we have things available that we just need to uplift. We have gaps that we need to fill, or maybe that's adequately addressed and maybe not advertised well, or whatever the case is. But we could get a good idea of what's already in place and where the collaborative can kind of fill in the gaps or support things that are already happening, or how so we know what we have, and then we
Yeah.
decide like what our overall goal is and how we can meld the two to get to the end point.
So it sounds like we're working through 4 categories under quality of life. Rita, I imagine it'll take you and Jen some time to pull that data that we were referring to. But currently we are scheduled to meet bi-monthly. And so I just want to check in with the group to make sure that that is a good fit for everyone and that makes sense for our the pace that we want to operate under.
Every other month?
Every other week. I'm sorry. I said
Every other, so
week.
bi-weekly, okay.
Yeah.
Well,
I think Pastor Jones may have jumped out his seat over there when I said that. Bi-weekly.
Weekly.
I'm sorry.
I would tell you, it was rolling through my head. I would tell you that.
So Samina, we can run this by Jen, but I don't think getting a Qualtrics survey together would be hard to have like something ready to go out by maybe tomorrow. And we can start getting some of that information. We can start working out of the data systems and reports that are already available. I'm sure Jen is well plugged into where to get those things from. And that should give us even more information to go off of for our next discussion in 2 weeks.
Okay, what
Awesome.
about the other sources of surveys that Pastor Jones talked about? Who's going to kind of pull those together for us?
That's me. And
The
Jen.
one that OSHA did, any that would be helpful.
Yeah, we're gonna target both, so we can help Samino send out the
Okay.
survey to collect the information that we need from the leadership group.
Mhm.
And then Jen and I can also tackle trying to figure out what information is already available.
Already available. Okay, all right.
Awesome. With that being said, I know it's the couple of days after the holiday. It's a beautiful day, so I won't keep you long. I scheduled this for 90 minutes because Minister James, I wanted to make sure we had enough time for discussion. And I think we had a good discussion today. And next time we meet, we'll have an opportunity to have a bit more data around that discussion that I think will help us move a bit further along. And so I'm excited and greatly appreciative of you all taking the time to meet today. And so I'm going to give you 10 minutes back of your time to enjoy the rest of your day. And just want to end by saying thank you so much. And really appreciate the discussion and the time that you all provided today.
Thank you very
All right,
much.
thank you. You
Yeah,
guys have a
thank you,
great day.
Samino. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thank
listen,
you.
you guys enjoy the
Bye-bye.
rest of the day. And,
Thank you.
and have
You
a
do the
great
same,
week as
sir.
well.
Bye.
Yes. Get some R&R, Pastor.
Thank you. Have more meetings. Take care. And I should mention to you, every time my group I get them out 10 minutes earlier, they try to add on to that at the next meeting. So we'll see what happens. All right, man. Take
Have a
care.
good one. You too.